Chairman Cecilia Rouse, I appreciate the time today. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You currently hold the position as chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and you are the first Black woman to hold the position. But you and your family are not new to breaking down barriers. Your dad was one of the first Black men in this country to receive a Ph.D. in physics. What would you say to any person watching this video who finds themselves staring at a glass ceiling?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. Look, I don't even know if I've hit a glass ceiling, right? So I guess what I would say is about just one's life is to figure out and see if one can come to an understanding of one's own passions and goals. I actually always encourage my students not to be too specific about those goals. By age 30, I want to do X, and by age 35, I want to do Y, because life is just not like that. But I think honestly, it's about understanding what one loves to do and finding a way to do it. There are many ways to bring one's talents to the labor market. I have kids. School is a very rigid construct. Kids who do really well on taking tests or writing essays in school and may feel as if they're not smart and that they have nothing to contribute to society have to understand that in the real world, there's so many ways to contribute. And everybody's got talent, and we have to understand and embrace that. So what I would say is, try to understand what one really loves. And I will say, though, about breaking barriers, it is about a lot of hard work. And it's about recognizing that there are going to be setbacks, that you have to pay attention to details. You have to learn to work in teams, and you can't let the turkeys get you down. Probably dating myself with that expression, but there are going to be setbacks. There are going to be people who are not friendly, who are uncooperative. You have to stay true to yourself and keep going and understanding that you're a wonderful person, creative, smart, have something to contribute, and keep going.
Being responsible for the health of the U.S. economy sounds incredibly difficult any year, but especially during a pandemic. That just takes it to a whole nother level. When you were tapped for this position, what was the first thing that ran through your head?
Literally the first thing that ran through my head was, no, I'm not going back. I have been saying that I'm not going back. The White House is a very special place. It's a very important place. But I also loved I was dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. And I very much felt there were important things for me to do there. I have a daughter who is just finishing up her senior year. So this is in the middle of her senior year of high school, and didn't want to disrupt her final year of high school either. But that said, after I got past that, the second thought was that we are in a unique situation in the American economy, in our country, where we've got these multiple crises. You have a once in 100 year, we hope, pandemic, which just has decimated the world. It required powering down the economy. So that sparked an economic crisis. And then you layer on top of that the racial justice crisis in our country. And then I want to layer on top of that real questions about the future of our democracy. And so as much as I was a bit reluctant to go back, I felt like it was a moment where I wanted to do what I could to make things better for our people, to make things a little better for those who've been left out of our economic system. Because I felt that with President Biden and Vice President Harris, who were at the times President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris, that they shared that value, that they shared that goal, and that I could make a difference. And we might be, Washington is not that usually does not make quick movements, but that we could make some progress in the right direction. And that would be very important and hopefully lasting.
I think a lot of times working families get frustrated because they can turn on the TV and hear cable news saying the economy is doing great. And then you look at your own community and it doesn't feel that way.
Yep.
How do you personally define a healthy economy?
Well, for me, a healthy economy is one where the prosperity is more widely shared than what we have right now in this country. A healthy economy is one where those who want to work are able to do so. Another part of a healthy economy is that people who work hard at a full-time job should be able to support their family on what they bring home, and that they should not have to stitch together 2 and 3 jobs and still not have adequate health care, still not be certain about where their kids are going to be going to school, not certain about other aspects of their life. I believe that families who are working hard and are doing a full-time job should be able to support their family based on the time and their labor. So that really involves a reframing of how we think about the role of government in some ways and about our economic system. It's not a major reframing. I don't want to exaggerate here, but it does go to the roots and in my perspective, the motivation between President Biden's American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan. One way to think about it is that for the past 40 years or so, the federal government's been following a policy that largely started with Reagan, which is that government should be small. We should be reducing taxes to stimulate the economy, and that a rising tide will lift all boats. That was largely the framing. And I would argue that over the last 40 years, what we've seen is that a rising tide has not lifted all boats. We've had increasing inequality, economic inequality. And that with globalization and technological change, which have been innovations which will continue. And the horse is out of the barn there, we're not going to go back. But we have to find ways to ensure that as we're making these gains, as we are making this kinds of progress, that those benefits are more widely shared. That really goes to the heart of the American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan. And it does so in a way that says, government is not a dirty word. The market has many strengths. A market economy can solve many problems, but there are some problems that cannot solve on its own. And climate change being one of them, ensuring that people have adequate education is another, and providing a really robust safety net, I think, is another.
My view is that we are seeing the beginning of what could be an extremely pivotal labor movement. On social media, you see the signs of fast food restaurants where employees are striking, or the hashtag Fight for 15 trending. Mm-hmm. Why do you think the federal minimum wage has been stagnant for so long? And how do we get those numbers up to a livable wage?
Well, now you're asking a political question, but I would argue that a $7.50 federal minimum wage is not adequate, right? It's not enough to raise a family on. And so workers are stitching together 2 and 3 jobs to get by. So I believe that we need to be reducing our income inequality. I believe that in order to help the working class, for sure. And then I think there's even a more macro view, which is that I think our democracy is at risk as well. I don't know if there's empirical evidence behind this, but intuitively, my instinct is that democracies can't sustain having 2 classes. I mean, we have 2 classes, but to have, extreme versions of the haves and the have-nots, because, a democracy is really about everybody contributing and voting and being actively engaged. And then the majority rules. And if there are those who have all the power and those who have absolutely none of the power, eventually those without the power and without the economic wherewithal will rise up and say, this is, it's not working for us. We want something different. So, I think we have to take inequality quite seriously. And as I mentioned before, I think the way that the world economy is changing, it behooves us to figure out how to ensure that everybody is going to benefit from the changes as we go forward.
Student loans are crippling an entire generation of spenders. What would you say to a young person who is sitting on the side and feeling like they have an insurmountable amount of student loans? And is a student loan forgiveness plan a realistic outcome of the Biden administration?
So there are student loan forgiveness plans already. For people who take certain jobs. They're not working as well as they should be. And President Biden, at least campaign candidate Biden has some proposals to help make those programs work better. But there's also something called income-based repayment. Some people call it income-driven repayment, where someone who owes money should have to pay no more than, okay, I'm going to forget the exact numbers, but it's like 10 or 15% of their income in terms of student loans. And so they can apply to the Department of Education to to reformulate and restructure their loan so that they're not paying an exorbitant fraction of their income. I personally believe that student loans should be part of the financial aid portfolio, but students have to be very careful when taking out student loans and very smart about where they're going to school and not. And I think we have to do our part to make sure the students have the right information. Also President Biden has put forth a free community college is a way to try to reduce community college tuition at a minimum by getting states to take back what they used to pay, contribute more to public institutions. He's proposing to, there's money in the American Families Plan to give grants to HBCUs and tribal colleges and minority serving institutions so that they can try to lower tuition as well. And subsidize students attending their institutions. And he's also proposed increasing the maximum Pell Grant, again, to make it more affordable for families. So we know, college has gotten quite unaffordable for families. This is not only a factor of tuition going up, but of incomes stagnating, so that as a fraction of family income, tuition's gotten to be rather high. And we need to do something on both sides.
So I want to pivot here because I know time is of the essence, but I see you have a very large book collection behind you. Mm-hmm. A fun fact I learned about you is that your mother-in-law is without a doubt one of the most iconic authors of all time. In my world, she's the GOAT, greatest of all time. I never got a chance to meet her. Rest in peace to such a powerful soul. But from an outsider's perspective, she seemed like an incredibly dynamic woman. I would love to hear what she was like.
I described at one point early on when I got married that I had won the mother-in-law jackpot. She was, it was a force, but she loved her family. Her sons were so important to her. They were the center of her life. So she was writing Nobel Prize winning books and mothering these two boys. As a result, she took great delight in her grandchildren as well. She loved having people over. She had a wonderful sense of humor, but just such a deep and thoughtful individual who, was really about trying to understand the human condition, and especially the human condition for African Americans. But she came at it from her place from Lorain, Ohio, from her family. She was very grounded in her own family. And then, but was, wide-eyed about what the world was like and never pulled a punch. So she was always willing to call it like she saw it. So we miss her. We miss her greatly. The world has lost a wonderful person, a great intellect, but also just a wonderful human being.
No doubt about that. She's, like I said, one of the most iconic authors of all time, and her contributions, I still try to read as much as I can, of her work. Mm-hmm. But Chair Rouse, thank you so much for the time. I know you're extremely busy. How can people, if they want to follow you or stay in touch with all the things that you're doing, outside of government websites, how can they do that?
So sadly, I am not on social media. The campaign created a Twitter account for me that people have noticed has gone dormant. So send me an email at the Council of Economic Advisors. I'm old school that way. But I love hearing from people. I love mentoring young people in particular. And my students know my door was always open because I really believe, I know I benefited so much from those who are willing to take the time with me. And I want to pay it back, pay it forward.
Perfect. Well, we appreciate the time and thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.